Hi everyone, welcome to our comprehensive AWS course. Aditya here. In this series, we have already covered the introduction to the AWS. Now, in this session, we are going to cover AWS Global Infrastructure. So, this is an overview of AWS Global Infrastructure, right? Since we are starting from basics, I want to touch this topic. And once this topic completes, we will directly dive into the IAM section where you will see hands-on and learn the crucial IAM topic in AWS. Okay, without any further ado, let's dive into the topic. And with respect to AWS Global Infrastructure, you may wonder how AWS is able to achieve high availability, scalability, and how it is able to serve the applications globally with minimum latency, right? That's the question arises in everyone's mind when they are using AWS. How they are achieve this success, right? The mantra is they are using this AWS global infrastructure, and it has few components. And if you see these components, you will know how AWS is able to achieve this global infrastructure seamlessly. Okay, it includes few components like regions and availability zones, edge locations. We will call them as point of presence recently, but earlier it is edge locations and data centers. Okay, and if you see, these are the four important components in AWS Global Infrastructure. And if you observe carefully, you have 34 regions globally currently, and you have availability zones 3 to 6 per region. That is 108 availability zones globally, and for edge locations, you have 600 plus globally edge locations available there, and data centers, right? Now we will see how these components are interrelated to each other and what are these components. We'll start with regions, right? What is region? And if you see here, you have 34 regions available globally, right? And if you see this map, you can able to see all the regions information displayed here. A region is nothing but a part in a country. We can say, for example, if you take America, you can say US East 1 is a region, Northern Virginia, and US East 2 Ohio is another region, US East 2. Like in India also we have two regions, and in Australia we have some regions, in South America we have regions, and in Africa you have some regions, right? In Seoul we have regions, Tokyo, London, right? All the Asia continent also you have few regions, right? So a region is nothing but a part in a country. We can say sometimes a single country should have single region also. That can also possible. But you can remember like this: a region is nothing but a part in a country where AWS has their data centers. So regions are nothing but AWS data centers, and we are using those data centers for our infrastructure. Okay, so they are providing this global infrastructure through regions. So regions is the very important concept in AWS global infrastructure. And now we have availability zones, right, which are a part inside the region. So inside region you will have availability zones, and each region may have minimum three availability zones to maximum of six availability zones. Okay, so each region can have three to six availability zones, and in total, globally, we have 108 availability zones available there. And another one is the edge location. Edge locations are not tied with availability zones, but they can be tied with regions, right? So edge locations usually used as an independent servers. They will serve majorly for content delivery. For example, if you want to deliver your content quickly to the customers at that time, edge locations will be useful. We will dive deeper in the future sessions, but you can remember like this: edge locations majorly used for the CDNs, content delivery networks, right? Where you want to give your customer low latency applications, right? Web applications. In that case, these content delivery networks, right? Edge locations will be useful. And finally, data centers. Data centers are part inside the availability zones, right? Inside regions, you will have availability zones, and each availability zone should contains data centers. Okay. So these are the four important components of global infrastructure. And through these four important components of global infrastructure, AWS is able to serve the customers globally. Now, moving on to the next slide, choosing an AWS region. So you may wonder, right? Okay, you know about regions, availability zones, edge locations, and data centers, right? And you know a region should contain availability zone, and inside an availability zone should contain data centers. So ideally, it's a data center, right? Uh, but you may wonder how to choose a region, right? You have some application, you want to deploy your application, and you want to use AWS, and how to choose a region with respect to your use case, right? For that, you have some criteria, right? Some factors also. So we will look into those factors. So choosing the right region is crucial, and factors like legal compliance, latency, service availability, and cost play a big role, right? So whenever you are selecting a region for your application, first thing you need to check the compliance and data governance. For example, if you want to deploy your application in some country where they strictly follows some data governance, they don't want to flow the data outside of the country. So in that case, right, you can't deploy your application and send information out of that country, right? So first thing you need to check about this data governance in which region you are going to deploy means that particular region has more number of restrictions from the government and more compliance needs, you will be very careful, right? So first thing you need to check compliance and data governance, and second thing is customer proximity for low latency, definitely, right? Whenever we are deploying some application in a particular region where your customers is situated in another region, in that case definitely there will be some latency in your application because your application is situated in one region and your customers are situated in another region. There will be a network delay possibilities there. So instead of that, if you deploy your application in a region which is nearer to your customers, then your customers won't feel this latency. So that is the second point you need to consider. And third point is service availability. So service availability is the very important concept you need to remember. Why service availability? Like why all the services are not available in all the regions. So you have to remember this point. All the services are not available in all regions. So some regions won't have all the services. US East one have some services, and AP Southeast one should not have the same services which are in US East one. So that can be possible. So the thing you need to remember is most of the AWS services are region specific. That means in one region, if you have one service, it is not guaranteed that the same service present in another region. It may or may not be present in the another region. Okay, so you need to remember service availability. And if your application needs some services and those services are not present in the region where you selected, then it won't be an ideal AWS region selection for you, right? So that is one thing. And finally, the cost, definitely. Each region costs are different. For example, US costs in a different way, where London regions cost in a different way. Some you will incur cheaper costs and some you will incur higher costs. You can go to the AWS and check which in which region the service you are going to select charges, right? Maybe you are selecting US East one and go to the AWS console and check in US East one how much this EC2 instance cost, and go to another region like AP Southeast one and check how much AWS costs for EC2 in that particular region, right? So based on that, you can come into a conclusion based on your cost, customer proximity, service availability, and also compliance and data governance. If you are good with all these things, that means you have chosen an ideal region, right? I hope you understand. So first you need to decide on the factors in which factor you are going to select an AWS region. Based on that factor, you can choose an AWS region. I hope you got better clarity on AWS regions. So I'm moving on to the next slide. That is availability zones. So what is an availability zone? Right? Why they called it is an availability zones. So first thing, availability zones are a part of regions. That thing we know, right? We have already seen in the previous. Within each AWS region, you will have multiple availability zones. Minimum you will have three availability zones and maximum you will have six availability zones. That means a region should contain some availability zones. And why you need these availability zones, right? Availability zones are nothing but, right, they are discrete data centers. So availability zone is your data center. So in a region, if you have multiple availability zones, for example, three availability zones, each availability zone should contain data centers, that means servers. And if one availability zone got down, any disaster, maybe some earthquake or any disaster, technical issues, the other two availability zones able to serve your application so that your users won't feel the downtime. That means your application is highly available. So this feature of AWS makes AWS applications are highly available because of this availability zone concept. In the same region, they will have different data centers, right? Maybe three or six data centers, and each data centers have redundant power, networking, and ultra low latency. That means if you deploy an application in AWS and you enable this availability zones option there, then what will happen is the same application will be replicated into all the availability zones. So your same application is running in availability zone 1, availability zone 2, and availability zone 3. And if availability zone 1 is down, then other two availability zones able to serve your application. And these three got connected with redundant power, networking, and ultra low latency that makes the whole system an highly available system. That's why they are calling these things as availability zones. And if you see this picture, right? For example, if you have a region called AP South, and here in the AP South you will have three availability zones: AP South 1, AP South 2, and AP South 3. And inside these availability zones, you can see discrete data centers are available, and each of them connected with ultra low latency networking. So that whenever you deploy some application in South 1, the same application will be replicated quickly in South 2 and South 3. And if South 1 is not available, right, South 2 or South 3 will serve the application to the end customers, and end customers won't know the impact happened in South 1 or disaster happened in South 1. The application is highly available to them. So that is the advantage of using the availability zones. That's how AWS achieve this high availability services. And you can see so many places, right? AWS displays 99.99% availability. That is because of this availability zone concept. And moving on to the next concept, that is point of presence or edge locations. We have globally 600 plus edge locations in 90 plus cities, and which supports low latency content delivery. As I explained earlier, these edge locations usually used for CDN content delivery and network. And if you want to deploy your websites and you want to give low latency to the customers, right? If your customer are accessing your website and if you want to give them low latency while delivering some content, in that case, these edge locations will be helpful. These are independent servers which are not related with availability zones. These are independent servers which will be present in all the regions, right? And once the user hits, right, hits your application, if your application is a website and which is serving content, right, which is delivering content, then instead of again hitting back to the server which is located in different region, what we will do is we will cache this information of your website in an edge location so that the user will quickly access the website without any delay, right? For example, if you take Netflix, Netflix was deployed in US, but we can able to access that Netflix through India or different regions, right? Different countries. You can see if the network bandwidth is slow also, the initial loading will be quickly happen, right? It will at least show some initial screen for us, right? And that is happened because of the caching, and the caching was enabled by the edge locations. So whatever content you want to deliver, and if you want to deliver them with ultra low latency or low latency to a customer, in that case edge locations will be helpful, which is completely different from the availability zones. Availability zones are helpful for high availability of your application. It's majorly focuses on disasters, right? But edge locations are for purely for content delivery. So I hope you understand about all the key components of AWS Global Infrastructure, right? We have discussed about regions. Inside regions, we have availability zones. An availability zone is nothing but data centers, right? And independently you will have edge locations, which is used for serving low latency content to the customers. So these are the four pillars in AWS Global Infrastructure. And moving on to the next slide, that is regarding AWS service types. And in the first slide, we have already observed AWS services are scoped to regions. That means a service in one region cannot be guaranteed to be available in another region. And the cost also differs from region to region, right? So you can see, and so you can see there are some region scope services, and we have another type also, that is global services. So global services means these services are globally same. That means, for example, if you take IAM, Route 53 or CDN, right, these are the services we are going to cover in the future, but these are examples of global services. And you will have web application firewall also in this list. All these global services, if you observe, these are same for all the regions. So these are global services. So that what will happen is, if you create once, it will be applicable throughout your AWS account. It's not like it will change for each and every region. So that's why it is called global services. And we have seen another services, right, that is region scoped services. These are mostly related to our Amazon EC2 Lambda recognition, right? These services are scoped to region. So in that case, each and every region, the cost differs and the availability also differs. That wraps up our AWS Global Infrastructure and AWS service types. And in the next episode, as I promised, we will dive deeper into core services like IAM, and after that I will cover EC2 and S3 and so on. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. See you in the next video. Bye.